Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome. Thank you for coming. We are trying to find some more chairs so people won't have to stand along the back wall. But I understand that we may have taken every chair out of the building already. But I do appreciate the interest, and as do we all. My name is Ted Hess-Mahan. I used to be a city councilor and somebody. And I'll be moderating tonight. With me tonight at this meeting is Barney Heath, who's standing right over there, who's the Director of Planning. And right to my left, to your right, is Lily Kanan Reynolds, who is the Community Engagement Planner. Planner or Director? Manager, thank you. I knew it was an important job. Next to her, James Fries, who is the Deputy Director of Planning and Development in the City of Newton. We'll also have tonight Treff LaFleche, who is an architect in the City of Newton. And you still on the ZBA, Zoning Board of Appeals? He's on the Zoning Board of Appeals. We have with us tonight from the City Council, Jim Cody from Ward 3.
Who helped sponsor this and pull us all together. Thank you. Are there other Ward 3 Dems who are on the committee who helped out here? Wave your hand. Thank you for making all of this happen to each and every one of you. There is so much going on in the city. I almost feel like I could have headed south tonight. Needham Street, just like West Newton Square, is about to get torn up and repaired and improved. The traffic this summer is going to be tough, everybody. I'm just giving you the early advance warning because we've got West Newton Square and Walnut Street right in Newtonville and Needham Street, probably not till the fall at least. But it's going to be hard getting around the city. We know all of us want to get everything right. West Newton Square, the improvements you'll hear more about. The bids just came in. I don't know if this is probably breaking news. We opened the bids just a couple days ago, and it's come in at $5.6 million, which is a little higher than we budgeted, but within our financial capability. So we're just about to invest a lot of good work and needed work right in West Newton Square. The other two things, one is citywide. Again, we're doing the reform of zoning, and then the whole Washington Street corridor from here, West Newton Square, till just before Newton Corner. Newton Corner's going to need its own vision plan. Sorry about the noise, but let's come on in. Thank you. Good to see you. How are you? Good.
Oh, there you go.
Thanks for the extra chairs. I want to say a couple things. We still have time to influence what you're going to see tonight. None of these, the zoning ordinance and the Washington Street, are both still very much in draft phase. Now, they're not in draft 1. Both of them are more in draft 2, but they haven't gotten to the final drafts. So please, tonight you're going to have an opportunity to give feedback. My guess is with this many people, not everybody's voice is going to be heard tonight. We will tell you very explicitly how you can give feedback, what you want changed, what you're seeing that you like, what you really detest. I want to give a shout out to our planning department who has been working overtime. Again, there's so much going on in this city, and they've been right in the heart of it. So to Lily and James and Barney, a huge thank you. And by the way, I'm not leaving. I'm staying. I really want to hear, yes, I actually know what they're going to say. I've heard it before. Nice part about being mayor, you get the sneak preview. But what I really do is want to listen to each of you. So I'll stay here till the very end. Thank you, Ted, for handling all. Oh, is it going to Ted or Barney?
Whatever.
Barney.
I'm
We'll
ready to
thumb
go
wrestle for it.
in the interest of time because we really want to hear from you folks tonight. So we're going to break this into 3 parts. My name is Barney Heath. I'm the Director of Planning. Thank you for being here tonight. So we're going to talk about 3 things, as the mayor said: the zoning redesign project, the Hello Washington Street, and the West Newton Square enhancements. So I'm going to talk about the Hello Washington Street. We've been at this a while. We started last spring, actually, right here in West Newton. We had an open studio on Washington Street. We had a number of engagements in this area. We recently we were out here a couple weeks back for zoning redesign, and we're here tonight. There's been a lot of interest in these various projects, so we really want to kind of get the facts on the ground tonight. I know a lot of stuff has gone out about stuff, and some of it, I think, produces a little bit of anxiety, and totally get that. I think what the mayor said before about as being an early phase and there's kind of a long way to go will hearten some people. We're here tonight to listen. So let's get into Washington Street. All right. What's going on, Lily? Oops, sorry. Let me back up. Okay. We all know Washington Street. Okay. Yeah. So I mentioned the community engagement. We have been out. We'll continue to receive engagement in the coming weeks and months on these projects. Let's talk about the facts in terms of the project. What is Hello Washington Street? Basically, it's a blueprint for Washington Street. There's development that has come to Washington Street and will likely to continue to come in various fashions and forms, regardless of what happens with zoning. There's great interest in Washington Street. We'll talk more about that. We wanted to develop a plan on Newton's terms, in terms of what we would like to see. We also have given a lot of thought to how we might guide city investments and capture potential opportunities for some of these larger scale investments that we'll talk about. Again, this was initiated by the mayor and the city council early last year. It is a City of Newton project. There was a contract to bring a consultant team on board that's been hard at work. We've been at this from, as I said, the spring of 2018. We're hoping that this results in a city council adoption. So we're anticipating that to come before them sometime in 2019. What is a vision plan? It describes what an area could be in the future. A lot of communities do this. This is a wise thing to do rather than constantly kind of being in the reactive mode. You identify the kinds of things that you would like to see, and I know for us as a planning department, it really serves us well if we have something that we can say, this is really what the city wants. This is a guideline that you can look at before you come forward with a proposal that's not in line with what we have. Zoning is kind of the technical way you go about that. It's the city's regulatory tool. We spent as much time on this aspect as we did on the vision plan, because this is really the nuts and bolts about how development occurs and what the regulations are and what you hope to get out of development. It is a plan, this is really important, it is a plan that's 5, 10, 20, even 30 years in some cases. I think when you look at this all at once, it can be fairly intimidating because it looks like it's all going to happen in once. It's all shown in one place. There's unit counts, there's employee counts, there's traffic counts. Development doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in phases. In many cases, there's a process that has to be followed. There's a special permit that has to be granted by the city council. So it generally takes a while for things to happen. Here we go with the clicker again. Sorry about that. Okay. So why not just leave things the way they are? We often talk about kind of the no-build scenario in the planning world. what happens if we just leave things the way they are? So this is Washington Street, an example of a portion of it and what you would see. What's happening is that we're seeing kind of sporadic development along Washington Street in different places. And it's proven to be not terribly successful. Here's an example of one in terms of the current zoning. So the cost of land is so high along in Newton in general, but along Washington Street, to have zoning that allows, you know, a use like this is really not doesn't really equate with economics. So in order to receive the value back for development, you need something a little more than something shown here. It doesn't really result in a particular amenity for the area as well. So we'll talk about that in a second. Again, this is just a kind of an image for a section of Washington Street. There's a good portion of Washington Street outside of West Newton Square that's very auto-oriented. Lots of used car lots, lots of two places where you can replace your windshield, gas stations and the like. So here's another spot that we're going to talk about in just a second, which is a fairly kind of intimidating no man's land. This is just outside the square, heading toward kind of the where the tower is. That's the West Newton MBTA Station. Kind of a tough stretch that's really not well integrated into the neighborhood, and perhaps represents an opportunity. This is just an image of our commuter rail stations, which I think there's general agreement aren't what they should be. They're inadequate, inaccessible, not friendly places to be. Unfortunately, to fix them, it's quite expensive. The MBTA has it on their radar screen, but it's a very expensive job depending on whose numbers you use. And what you want to get out of your station, whether you want just a barely accessible train station or you want something that potentially has the ability to have more frequency of trains. Let's start at 50 million and go up to 150 million, just for a ballpark. It's a kind of a big lift on the part of the MBTA to get there. I would love it if they would pick up the tab for the whole thing, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. So we have to be creative about how we get what we want. I mentioned this briefly. Redevelopment is happening. I think that's a really important point to make. We've seen it happen along the corridor. Washington Place is an example of that. We had one last year in Newton Corner on Washington Street, Sunrise Assisted Living. It's likely that that's going to continue. One of the ways that happens is a developer will come in after they've assembled land and either propose zoning from the list of zoning that we have and say, I think that the current zoning that you have is inadequate, and I think this zone is appropriate, and they can do that. They can pick one of the zones that we have, or they can create their own zone and say, I think the zoning should be this. Our goal is to kind of set the table and say, these are the zones we want along Washington Street. This is what we would like to see. It's a much tougher argument for them after we've gone through a complete planning process. The city council has adopted new zoning to come in and say, hey, we don't think your zone works. Well, we do because we just spent a lot of time on it and done studies, and we think it's appropriate. This is a comprehensive, holistic plan, again, instead of responding development by development. I've talked about the current zoning a little bit in terms of its inadequacy. It's inadequate in that exactly what I just said, which is that proposals are going to come forward that aren't consistent with the zoning that we have. We can continue to do that, and that's one method of doing that. What happens is that they'll come forward with their own zoning, and it'll play out in a special permit process. It'll be likely to be a long, kind of dragged out process, and you don't really know where it's going, so it's a bit unpredictable in terms of the result. And important for the planning department, we don't get the things that we'd like to lay out in our zoning. So we've set a very high standard for what we're looking for in development along Washington Street. I'm just going to touch on these briefly. Underground parking is something that we think is really important for sizable developments. Affordable housing, that's a kind of a key piece for us. It's hard to build affordable housing anywhere. It's particularly hard in Newton. One of the ways that you can get affordable housing is through development in general. So right now, 15% of developments that has housing has to be permanently affordable. And by that I mean 80% or below of median income. Actually in Newton we have it even lower than that. Our median income average for affordable housing is 65%. But these are units that are in perpetuity. So it is a way to generate a fair amount of affordable housing. Green space is something that's come up again and again. Again, you saw kind of the pictures of Washington Street. There isn't a lot of green space. There's not a lot of public gathering space. One of the things that came out strongly in our meetings that we had and was a desire for places for people to congregate, restaurants and the like. Green space is a critical aspect of that. Talked about architecture. That's really important to us, that whatever happens along Washington Street kind of respects the place and is great architecture that fits. Talked about climate change mitigation. There's certainly an opportunity to incorporate sustainability in all of the developments. We've done that through zoning. Also, we recognize how important it is to maintain kind of the local businesses and local retail. We've worked some things into the zoning that intentionally have smaller storefronts, again, to make them affordable for local businesses, to kind of prevent the large chains from coming in. It's kind of a detail, but it is in there. These things, however, are not what developers generally like to do. These are kind of add-ons. So there is a kind of a cost that goes along with these that developers have to kind of put in their pro forma. And we think it's highly appropriate that they have those in there, but it does come with a price to pay on their end. Okay, you're probably not going to be able to read everything here. This is the entire kind of Washington Street corridor from Craft Street to the West Newton MBTA Station. The colors represent the different building heights. There's a corollary map that has the zoning that is even more specific, but this is the general array, and without getting into the details, the heights run from 2 stories to a couple of areas where there's 10 stories, a mix of 3, 4, and 5. Some have special permits associated with it. I just want to focus in on the area to the left there, the kind of maroon color. That's the area that I showed that's kind of the MBTA environs, and I think there'll be a map that I'll get to in just a second that shows that. That's the one area that, and I could talk about Craft Street in a second, where we did indicate that would be appropriate for some height. That's the area that, again, is kind of depressed in a lot of ways, but it's depressed in terms of land that's adjacent to the pike. There's an opportunity there to capitalize in terms of getting some development that might pay for some improvements in that area that is somewhat buffered from the rest of the neighborhood. And I think the real opportunity is to be able to kind of knit that area back into the square. So it's a much more pleasant experience for folks that live in that area, that are able to walk from there to the square, to be able to park in that location potentially and walk into the square. Sorry for the delay here. So that's the area there, roughly. Oops, sorry. Yep. This clicker's not cooperating. And there we go. Okay, so it's roughly in that yellow area, which, again, just to orient you, in the top part of the screen, that's the West Newton MBTA parking lot. That's kind of the exit ramp, Route 16 heading out of the square. Just kind of a mess of things. So one of the things would be, in addition to station improvements in that area, is really making roadway improvements. So that becomes more of a street rather than what it is now, which is an extension of the highway. That's kind of a vision for that area, granted, but it could be much better than it is today. Okay. Yeah, sorry, Lily. Okay, so just a quick image. Yep. So this is an image coming across the bridge into West Newton Square. Yeah, sorry about that. How about here? So this is an image coming across. So I just want to show you what was in the vision plan. That, again, talking about that kind of knitting together piece, right? So rather than a really ugly area that you have to walk through, it's an area that is lined with stores, that has some greenery. That's a much more pleasant experience. Now, granted, this is a vision plan, so this takes a little bit of imagination. Okay, so what do we hear? I think a lot of people have expressed comments. We've got a lot of comments, 2,500 online comments, I think, Lily, and lots of face-to-face interaction, lots of emails. People want a variety of building heights, so they range from 2 to 12 and higher, but what they don't want is kind of a monolithic wall of the same height going across. They like the idea of incremental building, the way that cities used to be built, kind of one building at a time. So we've incorporated that into our zoning plan so that developments have that varying building heights. Widths of buildings are generally pretty narrow, so you don't get these big, long, monolithic structures. Here's an example of that, kind of the same location envisioned with buildings on it. And you can see the variety of heights shown. There's another one coming up that illustrates that point as well. So this is a view, I think, from on Chestnut Street. Yeah, looking into the square. You know, it's okay. It's not the most pleasant experience, but again, using kind of the vision plan, enclosing the street, making that experience as a pedestrian, as a bicyclist, frankly, as a motorist, a much more inviting environment. Here's Dunstan Street. One of the concepts that we've talked about is how does development interact with the neighborhood, right? So Washington Street is one thing, and you see all the commercial, but folks live behind. What's their experience? What happens? So we've talked a lot about development stepping down as it gets to the neighborhood, so it integrates much better with the neighborhood so that the height of the building is on the Washington Street side, and that as you get closer to the neighborhood, the heights are a much closer match to what's existing, and that's in the plan. I'm just going to run through some of the benefits. I've talked a lot about the plan, but I just want to leave you with some of the benefits that we see that can come from a well-designed vision and zoning plan. Certainly green space and trees, we paid a lot of attention to that. We know how important that is. I mentioned this, these are what we call precedent images of places that people have indicated that they would like to see in Newton, and places that you'd want to walk to with your family and experience. Certainly better train stations. We deserve much better than what we have. It's going to take a little work to get there, but we're all on board with that. Trains aren't the only way for people to get around. We want to pay attention to the buses and take full advantage of them as well. The West Newton Square program that you'll hear about in just a second has accommodations, much better accommodations for buses and passengers. Okay, so to a great extent, this is a plan. Everything's about people, right? What they experience. This plan is about people. It's about making the experience for people that live here now better, for people that come to Newton, that are new residents, to give them the opportunity to live here and take part in the community. It's also a new customer base for stores. I think there's these developments, I mentioned the affordable housing. There's also people with disposable income throughout the development that can come and frequent the stores. And as I mentioned, it's a great source of affordable housing. Want to touch briefly on Cheesecake Brooke. It is a feature, a natural feature that does exist in West Newton. It's not as prominent as it perhaps might be, and a feature that could be improved. So we've talked about that and the opportunity presented in this plan. So just want to leave you with this. The big part of this is to be able to control development as opposed to constantly reacting to it. So the comment period for draft 2 is until March 12th. We're aiming for the end of April to present this to the City Council. Okay, I think I'm going to turn things over to James. Oh, okay. I think we have some chairs coming.
There are some empty seats over here, to my right, to your left. And we've got some folks bringing in some more seats. While they're doing that, I want to recognize a few other people who I neglected to mention at the beginning. I do want to thank, again, Larissa Hordinsky and the Ward 3 Democratic City Committee, as well as the Ward 3 City Councilors, for putting this meeting together. There's been road shows all over in every ward on zoning reform in particular, and the feeling was that at the last meeting that we had at Second Church, that there were a lot more questions that wanted to get to. I'm just going to recognize a couple of people I hadn't recognized before. Ping Shen is in the back. He is your Ward 3 school committee member. Everybody see him? Also Dana Hansen, who's Director of Community Engagement and Inclusion in the Mayor's Office. Noreen Silton, who's been carrying chairs, who is the Executive Assistant to the Director of Planning. And anybody else that I forgot to introduce? One other thing I want to mention. Andrea Kelly, who's the Councilor at Large from Ward 3, was unable to be here tonight. She's having some surgery on her shoulder. She'll be back playing tennis very soon. Oh, and a little bird told me to mention there are refreshments over here near the wall. Are you selling them, or are they free? Big money, okay. All right, so without further ado, James.
All right, so everyone eat the food and get a chair, all right? All right, good evening, everyone. So my role tonight is to talk about the zoning redesign project. So what is the zoning redesign project? This is looking at the entire city. This is new zoning, rewrite of our zoning ordinance for the entire city. This project originated actually in 2011, initiated by the City Council and the Mayor's Office at the time, in order to modernize our zoning ordinance, in order to protect Newton's neighborhoods, realize stronger and better environmental regulations in relation to development, to diversify our housing choices in the city, and that is just among a range of goals and objectives that were called for back at that time. The current phase of work that we're in right now initiated in 2016, and that's where we're really getting into the substance of writing a new zoning ordinance. And the first draft of that document was released in October of, I guess, last year now, October of 2018. And we've been in a process of a roadshow. We've gone to almost every ward. I believe we have one more ward meeting left, where we're taking 2 more ward meetings back left. Thank you. We have Ward 2 tomorrow night and Ward 4 next Thursday. So those meetings are allowing us to take feedback, and that feedback is informing our process as we move towards our second draft, which we're aiming to release at the end of May, beginning of June timeframe. So, as you guys can imagine, rewriting the ordinance for the entire city, big project, lots in it. I'm not going to get into the details tonight, but look forward to answering questions about it. So our current zoning, this map is showing roughly the Ward 3 area. So zoning regulates development. It regulates buildings, uses, dimensions, heights, all those things. So it regulates everything from a small addition someone might be putting on their house all the way up to a big development project somewhere. And the kind of the main piece of zoning really is these districts. This is showing, again, just the Ward 3 area, but you can see we have a lot of different districts, and in each district there's a different body of rules that regulate development in that area, dictating what happens in that area, whether it's a single-family district, a district that allows some degree of multifamily, businesses, commercial, etc. And what is our current zoning ordinance doing? Well, one of the issues with our current zoning ordinance is that the city is 87%, roughly, non-conforming with that zoning ordinance, which is basically to say that the city is, that 87% of the lots, 87% of our buildings are in some way not consistent with those rules. How could that be? What's going on? This is because largely the city was built, more than 80% of the city was built before we adopted the zoning that is really the basis for our zoning ordinance we have today. Our current zoning ordinance, really, the vast majority of it dates back to 1953. Most of you know, most of you probably live in a house that was built before 1953. And so that zoning ordinance really had a different vision about the future of the city than really the city that was on the ground at the time, that's on the ground today. One of the results of that is that our analysis shows that approximately 40% of properties in Newton's neighborhoods are vulnerable to speculative teardown. What we mean by that is that they're vulnerable to being torn down by a developer for the purposes of replacing that house with a larger house for profit. And I think many people are seeing that exact activity happening in these neighborhoods. That is a result. Those projects are by right allowed by the current zoning ordinance. Whoops. So quite simply, our goal with this ordinance is to produce better buildings. Now we've heard that in Newton's neighborhoods there's a preference for smaller detached houses, not townhouses. Townhouses represent an issue in many parts of our neighborhoods. That buildings should overall be smaller when they're in their neighborhoods, whether it's a single-family house or a multifamily house. That those buildings should be multifamily building. Those buildings should be smaller in the neighborhoods, and that particularly the 2-unit houses, which we see a lot of, particularly in this area of the city, should be more akin to the size of the single-family houses around them. They shouldn't be these two giant houses that happen to be attached to each other. So this is the map of roughly the same area under our new zoning redesign map. One of the things I'll point out right off the bat is there's far fewer zoning districts. We're trying to simplify the zoning ordinance and make it easier for folks to use. So what are some of the things this new zoning ordinance does? The rules within the districts themselves are written to better match the current patterns of development here in West Newton and, of course, all across the city. They're meant to embody a set of rules that are more familiar and produce buildings that are more familiar to what's already there. So a greater degree of conformity. So we're not dealing with an ordinance that's always making exceptions for that building that doesn't match the rules. We're just allowing buildings to be built that fit what we want. We've got new tools to directly address many of the concerns around lack of housing choices, around environmental standards, climate change, and the like. We're reducing the vulnerability significantly to speculative teardowns, and as I said, new incentives for sustainability. So, big project. Who decides? Once we finish this thing, who decides? Newton City Council decides. This is it's a legislative action. This is an ordinance like any other, and so it falls on the City Council to make a decision and ultimately adopt the zoning ordinance. Before that happens, of course, there would be a public hearing, a formal public hearing. Even before that public hearing, we're going to continue to do the meetings we've been doing to continue to collect feedback. And of course, we're working with the Zoning and Planning Committee of City Council. They're the ones charged with really doing the deep review and the work with us in creating this draft ordinance. Just briefly, I wanted to talk about the relationship between the overall zoning redesign effort and the Washington Street project that Barney was just speaking of. So on our map, on the zoning map that we're working from, at this point in time, we've simply created this dashed red line that represents the border of the study area for Washington Street. When the vision plan for Washington Street, when the zoning for Washington Street is adopted, should it be adopted, it would simply be incorporated into our zoning redesign draft and incorporated into our map. So until that point, these projects are completely separate. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Lily to talk about the West Newton Square street improvements.
Hey, everybody. Okay, so the third project that we're going to talk about today that's also happening in West Newton is the street, road, and sidewalk project that the mayor was mentioning in her comments. So we've called this project the West Newton Square Enhancements Project. It also has had a lot of community process around it, really dating back to 2016. We did site walks out in the square. We did visits to all the businesses multiple times. We had lots of community meetings, talked with the many residents. And what is this project? So this is really, as the mayor said, an opportunity for us to upgrade and improve the square right in the heart of West Newton Village. It's on Washington Street from Chestnut to just past the local. What does it include? So it's really about the street, the roads, and intersection improvements. I don't know if this happens to you or if this drives you nuts like it does to me, but on my way over here, just coming from City Hall to this building, those traffic lights in West Newton Square, how they're so close together, they're not synchronized, they get jammed up right in that really short stretch. So this project is in part about improving and simplifying those intersections, making it safer to cross if you're walking, making the sidewalks new, and adding in new bike lanes that will be protected, buffered bike lanes. We're also going to be redoing all of the signals, the traffic signals there, and making it so that they're modern signals and they can speak to each other, and also have some communication with our first responders to get through the square quickly. So as the mayor said, this is a city project, around $5 million invested right in the square. We're hoping to start construction this year. It will likely lead into 2020. And City Council approved the design in 2018. So this is sort of an overview of the proposed design. Just to orient you, the star on the right-hand side of the screen is Sweet Tomatoes, and the star on the left is Blue Ribbon Barbecue, more or less. Two important places to know if you want to go in West Newton. And so everything in the dark gray, right, everything that's sort of this dark gray area, that's where all of the road will be redone, and all of the sidewalks here. We're able to add 40 trees in this area, at least 40 actually, I think it's more like 45. Right now there's only 8 that are sort of holding on in the square, not doing too well. We're adding new types of infiltration system to make sure those trees are healthy and they get good water and good air. We're also adding parking, which we think is a good thing. So there's 19 new spaces that will be created as part of this plan. So why are we doing this project? Right now it's not really a very safe place to be. In fact, the state's own data, this whole area pops up as one of the most dangerous areas for crashes. Both motor vehicle crashes and crashes involving a pedestrian or cyclist. It's, I think, in the top 5% in this region. And why we're doing this is, the infrastructure that's out there right now is pretty outdated and not that inviting. So we think we can do better than this, and we have a lot of nice new things that we'll be able to put in here. So this is a rendering of what it will look like. This is, again, sort of Sweet Tomatoes right here. This plaza that's here will be expanded slightly, and we'll have new lights. We've heard a lot from, new lights that we've heard from people that it's quite dark at night, and at this time of year, it gets dark quite early. Like I said, new crosswalks, safer biking, and more trees. So just to finish up, so what happens next for these 3 plans? We're almost done with the presentation. So yeah, construction starting in 2019 for the enhancements. For the zoning redesign project that James mentioned, second draft coming up in May or June. And for Hello Washington Street, we actually have 2 drop-in office hours that are coming up if you want to have a smaller conversation with our staff. We've been doing these periodically over the last year. So on next week and on March 5th and March 13th, the week after, between 5 and 7 in room 205 of City Hall, we'll be talking about this plan. But you're welcome to talk about any of this stuff with us. And then, as Barney said, the draft 2 comment period is a month long. So that ends March 12th, and then we'll be working on the 3rd draft for City Council at the end of April. So I think that's it, and we're going to hand it over to Treff, I believe. Is that right?
Thank you. When Larissa asked me to join this panel, I stopped and thought, why am I being asked to be here? I'm not in government, but I do live in West Newton. I've lived there since 1991, and I've practiced as an architect throughout New England, but particularly in Newton since 1991. And I think I'm here because I am probably representing that group of people that do struggle with the challenges of both being a citizen as well as a practicing professional that interacts with development and zoning every day of my working life. And so I can perhaps provide an augmented point of view as the discussion evolves tonight and questions come up that maybe I can answer that one of the other panelists could not. I don't think it's really worthwhile for me to talk too much. I'm sure you're all here to ask questions of others. But I will say this. I've worked in a lot of communities throughout New England. And the communities that have high land value are always the communities that struggle with zoning issues. And there's a very simple reason why that is. It's because high land value encourages improvements. Anyone who owns a piece of property is motivated to preserve that value and in often cases maximize its highest and best use. That's fundamentally smart. And a community like Newton, it has high land values for all kinds of reasons, not just the proximity to the city, but the fact that we have good governments, that we have good schools, and that we have a fair amount of good diversity in this community. And that diversity is directly related to the fact that people do want to live here and they do want to invest here. And so as a practicing architect, I'm very much motivated by maintaining that diversity, in fact, improving that diversity. And the way you do that is by allowing people ways in which to move into the city. As people grow older and move out, you want to make sure that younger people that have less economic means can move in. And when you have a community with very, very high land value like we have here, the tendency, if you don't think progressively through your zoning regulations, it becomes a hindrance for younger people to move in. The land values fundamentally prevent that. And in order to get greater diversity, you have to accept the fact that greater density will result from those higher land values. And I think Washington Street, as a commercial zone, is the perfect place where you intelligently create smart growth. You basically blend commercial development with higher density residential development. And by doing that, you provide a way in which younger people, as well as older people that are moving out of their homes, have a place to stay within the community, maintain that greater diversity, create an enlivened, thriving environment, and blend the single-family residential area north of Washington Street with a greater density of residential and commercial on Washington Street. To me, this is smart growth. This is the natural tendency throughout this country as a way in which to maintain the thriving neighborhoods that we all remember. So I leave you with those thoughts, and then I'll turn the mic back over to the group.
Thank you, Trev. Would you please put your hands together for all our presenters? So just a couple of quick things before we get into the question and answers. First of all, if you have your smartphone, cell phone, beeper, whatever it is, could you please put it on silent just so it doesn't distract or interrupt speakers or people asking questions. We are going to allow folks to ask some questions. First of all, how many folks want to ask a question? Okay, and how many of you folks are from, how many folks altogether from West Newton? I know where you all live, so you can't fool me. Yeah, I know where you're at. I know where you work, David, don't worry. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to close up shop exactly at 8:30. A couple reasons for that. That's when we have the custodian here to help us out. But also, just as importantly, it's going to snow tonight, and I don't want people driving home in the snow, particularly our staff who have maybe a little farther to go, because they're going to have to pack everything up. So we will be ending at 8:30. That means that for those people who want to ask questions, they're going to ask you to do a couple things. First of all, I'm going to come around to you and give you an opportunity to ask your question, but please be prepared to give me your name, your address, and what ward or village you're from, okay? As I said, we're going to check. Secondly, to give everyone a chance to ask a question, I just ask that you ask one question. If we have time, which I hope we will, we'll come back around again if you have follow-up questions. But just to be fair to everybody and give everybody who wants to ask a question a chance, want to do that. We may have time for a comment period afterwards, but please give your question in the form of a question. Everybody watch Jeopardy. You know how to phrase it in the form of a question. Don't give your question by way of a comment if at all possible. Boy, tough crowd. You going to heckle me already? All right, so we're going to get started now. And again, I just want you to identify yourself. And the last thing I'm going to say is be civil, be respectful, don't interrupt the speakers. And please, no hissing, booing, clapping, any sort of that nonsense, because it's just going to take more time, okay? So starting off with folks who have questions about, whether it's about West Newton in general, if you're from West Newton, you have any questions for our presenters, please raise your hand and I'll get around to you. Okay. You, sir.
My name is Tim LeBlanc. I live on 175 Mount Vernon Street, which is almost at the top of West Newton Hill. And when I look outside my window, I can almost see Arlington. With a 12-story building in front of me on the Mass Pike, West Newton Hill is only 145 feet tall. How tall is a 12-story building? And will that block my view?
Okay, so the question is, if you're living in West Newton Hill or any place with a scenic view, yep. If it allows for 10 stories, is that going to block someone's view? Who wants that one?
Yeah. Does this work? Can you hear me? Yeah, good. So that's near the station area, that I showed, the MBTA station. Is that the area? Okay, so there's no 12-story buildings anywhere near there. There's only one place where there's a 10-story building in West Newton, and that's the MBTA station. So I'd have to look at the map to get that right, but I think in that area the heights are even lower. 5 stories there, yeah.
You're across
So-
from the Armory or across from. Oh, Beacon
Yeah.
Street. Oh, it's closed now. Yeah. Okay, all right. Who else has a question? I'm going to start in the front and I'll get to the back. I promise.
It's Mark Lublin, 106 Fordham, if anybody wants to stop by. I don't think the city of Newton would have gone through all of this unless they planned on moving forward. So the question I have specifically to West Newton is, where is it prioritized to begin this type of development?
Yeah, so I can't answer that because I don't actually know. We hope to get this in place before development comes so that we're not reacting to it. So I can't tell you where it's going to start.
Okay, so yes.
Well, I just want to add that
sorry.
it's important to know that zoning is just the rules that allow you what you could do, but it doesn't mandate anybody to do anything. It's just allowing what you could do.
Bless you. Okay, you
Craig Midley, 56 Webster Street in West Newton. I'm just concerned, I mean, my question is, who decides kind of the maximum heights? So where do we reach this 5, 6, 10? What, are we implying that developers won't, it's not worth their time unless they can build a 10-story building? Because, I mean, putting 10-story building a stone's throw away from my house seems really wild. I mean, I'm having a hard time digesting that. So, I mean, why does it have to have 10-story buildings anywhere? What's the motivation on this?
So I just want to, that's a permit, so that's entirely discretionary. So anybody that would want to build a 10-story building would have to get a special permit from the city council. There would be extensive public hearings and discussion about it before anything like that happened. Otherwise, the height in that area, I think, is 5 stories. So I think that we thought there was an opportunity in that area by the MBTA station against the turnpike to potentially extract some money to make improvements in that area, kind of re-knit the area. But again, any development of that size, particularly in that area, is, oops, I think we just lost the mic, is going to require the MBTA to be involved, the city to be involved. So it's kind of a long process. So it wouldn't happen right away, if it did at all.
Yeah, Mike McGrath, 16 Kenyon Street, Ward 3. My question has to do with, given the magnitude of what we are talking about, has there been any thought considering whether or not the voters should actually get a chance to vote on this?
I'll take that one too. So that's not the way that that zoning works. It's an ordinance like every other ordinance. It's proposed before the city council. The mayor's going to weigh in, thankfully. So it's really a city council. It's a legislative act.
That's a really interesting question, and you can tell by the clapping that the sense of people is, boy, we'd love to have a real voice in this and have the decision-making rights be by the voters and the residents of Newton. So what's interesting is this is an election year for the city council. The decision makers for it, oddly enough, I'm not the decision maker here. The decision making is in the city council. We live in a representative democracy. You know, these are your neighbors, the city councilors. They're very accessible. Email them, ask them to have a cup of coffee at La Roma. They will be there. Understand who they are and what they believe in, and decide whether to vote for them. That's how you're gonna how you'll do it. And Susan Albright has a particularly interesting role. She's a long-term city councilor and also has an important role because she's the chair of our zoning and planning committee. And the zoning and planning committee does the deep dive on this. So, and she lives in Newtonville, right along Washington Street.
So I just wanted to say a few words about zoning and what's at stake for us in this city. I'm going to be sending out a letter to you all soon, but I'm going to give you a preview of what's in it. What's at stake is the future of our city, our economic health, for example. If you look at the economic development plan that was just established, doing something about our zoning is sprinkled throughout that plan. If we want to have real estate taxes that are supported by commercial development, we have to do something about our zoning, or else it's always on our residential tax base. We have to do something about zoning to preserve our village centers. You may have noticed that there's a lot of empty shops. We don't want that to happen. We want more feet on the ground. We want the opportunity for our shops to thrive. This is a little bit of a longer explanation, but I'll try and shorten it. So many of us in Newton, there's nearing 30% of us are retirement age, and yet we're still staying in Newton. What's happening is all of us are retiring from the jobs that we held at downtown, but we're not leaving our homes because we have no place to move to. So there's no place for the younger people to come and live near Boston. And there's a lot of development that might be happening that's cheaper out in the 495 belt. And what's happening because of that is something else that's at stake, and that's climate change. The more we put cars on the road and send people to work in the 495 belt, driving back and forth to Boston, the more we're affecting climate. So when the city council, I'm telling you all of this by way of saying that when the city council does this, we have to weigh and balance a lot. We have to weigh and balance keeping you all happy and making you feel good about where you live and where you want to be and what you want your neighborhoods to look like. And we have to balance the region, the economics, the climate. There's a lot for us to think about. And as great as you feel it would be, just let them, give you guys an option and let you vote on it. It's very complicated. We're listening to you. We want you to come and tell us what you think. We're glad that you're here tonight. And there'll be more opportunities for you to come and tell us what you like and what you don't like. What James didn't tell you is that just the other night, the planning staff gave us, after having listened to 6 of the wards, they gave us a change in the definitions of the residential districts. So they are listening very carefully. We are all listening very carefully. So hold on to your hats, keep talking with us, and hopefully we'll get it right.
Thanks. So just would you mind leaving up your hands? I'm going to take another question, but leave up your hands so I know who to come around to. And oh, there's more hands. Okay, great. So go ahead.
My question to Leslie's presentation was there was no detailed description of the traffic pattern and the impact it was going to have on the neighborhoods. We have a lot of moving pieces here, and frankly, I grew up in this city. I don't believe what's being put forth as what will happen to traffic and the neighborhoods. And I want a presentation to be put to everyone in this room tonight about what the designers of the system believe will happen. I don't think all of us will believe it, but please give your presentation specifically to that.
What's the question?
I'll
traffic. She wants to know about traffic.
So there's a really detailed, almost inch by inch plan, and do we have the website, the link up there on the screen? Somehow in the next half hour, we'll make sure you do it. We have it in great detail, inch by inch. And if you want to come in and visit with us and have you walk it through, there was so much to cover tonight that we weren't going block by block by block, but we know every single turn. We've done traffic studies, and it's been reviewed by the police, by fire, by the city councilors, so there's a lot there. I don't know if Ted's going to let you do a follow-up, but
So
what I saw there was Washington Street goes down to 2 lanes each way to 1 lane each way.
that is not. So again, in some places, yes, it goes down to.
Every place, and how it defies logic when traffic backs up almost to Wellesley, and how we are going to encompass a hospital, a firehouse, and a courthouse without having
So we did do the traffic studies, and you are right in the sense that the traffic to get through West Newton Square, it will take longer in the future when this work is done. But that was actually done intentionally. And I know it is slow. Going through at rush hour is a bear, even non-rush hour is a bear. The reason why it is slowing down was intentional, to make it so that it is a more walkable and safer if you are not just in a car. So it is slower. We knew that when we voted on it. I actually voted on this as a city councilor. So that was intentional, and it was discussed at great length. But it is actually was done intentionally.
I'll just add.
So I'm going to let somebody else take it.
If we want to give everyone else a chance to ask a question, I'll come back to you if you have time.
If I could just, with all due respect, most of the people in this room and their automobile habits don't represent the trends occurring with vehicular use.
Hey, folks, could you just let the speakers speak and not? Please don't speak over them. That's Treff LaFleche. Please don't speak over the speakers.
How many traffic engineers are in the room? Well, I'm just suggesting that you can either. Okay, thank you. So you can respond to my statement. All I'm simply saying is that trend lines are reduced automobile ownership. The younger people don't want to own cars. The comprehensive plan and the development that is being discussed here that's why they don't want to own cars. And so all I'm trying to say, look, if we're going to shout over each other, that doesn't get points of view out. All I'm trying to share you as a working professional is that all communities in America are grappling with outdated zoning regulations having to do with parking and traffic because it's evolving. And so I only caution you, don't try to solve the problems based on your knowledge of today. Grant to the professionals who are studying this thing every day some insight as to what is going to occur in the future. We're talking about the next 5 to 50 years here, not tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah. Please let. Hey, could we let people ask questions and also let people respond?
Hi, I'm Cynthia Lancelotti. I live at 1516 Washington Street in West Newton, and my office happens to be at 727 Washington Street in Newtonville, so I understand this very, very well. My question is this. I've heard a lot tonight about the bike lane and the new people coming in. We live in the Northeast. The bike lanes really don't do a lot, and our seniors have been forgotten. They're a distant memory. I have not heard in the handicap. But my son's a 5th generation in this city. I'm very proud to live here. I want to retire here. Our senior center is a disgrace, okay? A disgrace. And we're worried about bike lanes for the new people coming into the city. What about the people that made this city great long before you ever got here in 1991?
So who wants to take that?
I'll take it. We care about everyone who is currently living here, who is struggling to get through West Newton Square on a daily basis, who hates the congestion, who many of us, I'm one of them, I don't own a bicycle, I drive to West Newton, I get out and I walk. But there are, what we also know in this world is that the congestion that we're facing all over Newton, not just in West Newton Square, is getting worse, not better. Would everybody agree it's getting worse in Newton? There are only a couple ways out of this. One is to get the commuter rail and green line and buses improved, and I'm working really hard on that. The T is broke, so getting those changes are hard, but I'm pounding the table, and that's the telephone number I have in my Rolodex most, and I'm using the most. The other is to make it as much as possible, if we can even get 2, 3, 4%, 5% of those hardy souls who are willing to get out of their cars, and in the nice weather. It doesn't work, tonight. There's very few bicyclists anywhere in Massachusetts, and certainly not in Newton. In some weather patterns and for certain types of people, if we do make it safer to be on a bicycle, we can get some people out of their cars, and that's the only way forward, because there's no more land to build more streets. Folks, we're landlocked where it is. So make it safer to bicycle, make it nicer to be able to live and work and walk and play closer to your home as much as you can. Most of us are still gonna, if we can afford it, and I'm very sensitive to what the young man said here, it is so darn expensive to own a car. If we can afford to have one car, we're gonna be using it heavily, and we do have to make sure the Newton roads are in good condition and can work as best as they can, despite so many of us using it. So I hear you.
Okay, it's hard for me to ask politicians to be brief, so no, I'm not picking on you, Ruth Ann, I promise.
Hi, I'm Melissa Waite. I live at 89 Fordham, and just kind of wanted to quickly discuss schools. I mean, my working understanding with respect to the zoning is that our neighborhood will end up being zoned a bit more densely, which means I think there will be a few more families here. But at the same time, our schools are pretty crowded right now. So I'm just kind of wondering how much thought you guys have put into that, and if you have a plan moving forward. I think that a lot of the parents in the room would appreciate hearing that.
I think that's for me again. So I spend a lot, I don't have many sleepless nights, but my sleepless nights are about that, actually. We had a bizarre thing happen this year for the first time in 13 years, and I don't know if it's the beginning of a trend or just a blip. The number of students in the Newton Public Schools fell for the first time, and it was elementary, middle, and high school level. But I'm not taking that as the future. So I worry a lot about having the number of seats in the schools and the number, being able to afford the teachers to teach those kids. And every time we see Northland or Riverside or Washington Street corridor, I'm thinking, so how many families are moving in? How many kids do they have? What do the demographics look like? And we've got lots of information on demographics. I think there's a joint school committee and city council meeting help me out here, March 13th at City Hall, where we're looking at all these potential developments and saying, so what does it mean for the schools? I've been able to see the first draft, and definitely school population goes up. It's actually surprisingly looks like we can fit the number of kids in and the number of seats, but we got to be able to, if you look at the Franklin School right now, this building needs a ton of work, and that's without adding any more kids. And we have a whole slew of elementary schools that need it, and so there's work to be done. So I also look at these projects and say, so are they positive financially so that we can afford to do those improvements, because we really need to do them. So we're paying a lot of attention to it, and I will be the first one yelling if we're overbuilding here in such a way that we can't have excellence in our schools. That is the heart of what we as parents want, and actually I think is what makes Newton so attractive and keeps up our property values, frankly.
And if you got any follow-ups, please feel free to get in touch with Amping Shen. He's our Ward 3 school committee member.
Hi, my name is Julia Wolf. I live at 170 Cherry Street, and I want to thank all of you guys. This is an enormous amount of work. I can't even imagine what you've been going through. So thank you for your hard work. It's super, yeah, it's super complicated. And having both of these things coming at us at once, we're all confused. We're trying to wrap our heads around what's going on. I'm a layperson. I don't know any of this stuff. So my question actually to the mayor is, can you extend the comment period for Hello Washington Street for at least a month?
I don't think we can, but I'm going to look at, you could probably do it by a couple weeks, but not much more. Am I right?
Yeah, so if I can just address the process
Right.
piece, which
Yeah.
is, we're talking about comments on the second piece. There's going to be a third piece that's presented to the city council. There's a whole process after that with the city council that people can weigh in and come to public hearings. So we're a ways away, and eventually it's got to be voted on. So there will be a public hearing that's advertised, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure folks will be on top of that. So we've got a ways to go.
Hey there, I'm Mike Halley. I'm a Franklin parent. I live over on Cherry Place here. And one thing, first I wanted to say, as far as West Newton Square enhancements, thank you to Ted and the other counselors for their leadership in making this happen, and the city council for making it happen. I got involved as the first thing in Newton that I felt politically involved in. And it's because my daughter was in first grade, and I said, by the time she's in high school, I want her to do what a lot of people were able to do when they were kids, which is get to school independently without driving. Can you tell me how these pieces fit together to let her maybe do that? You know, is that, maybe we're cutting a little close, but.
So some of the things that we didn't have time to talk about today for the Hello Washington Street plan is actually a vision to take some of the improvements for West Newton Square and look at doing similar things all along Washington Street, stretching to Newtonville, and hopefully for the rest of the city. You might know that on Walnut Street in Newtonville, we're also doing and have funds set aside in our capital improvements for Walnut Street improvements as well. We know our village centers are sort of the jewels of Newton, where people want to be. They're also close to a lot of where our schools are. So that Walnut Street project is about a year after the West Newton Square project, so we think it's great. It'll be a lot safer for people to walk there. We're actually able to widen the sidewalks a lot in that project in Newtonville, so getting over to the high school, it'll be easier and safer. But hopefully there's a vision to bring some of these things all along Washington Street in the future. We're not going to get to the level of detailed engineering study that we've done for West Newton and Newtonville in the Hello Washington Street plan. That'll be future work that we'll have to do. But we have started to look at some of the options that we have there, and it's in the second draft, so if you have comments, we'd love to hear from you on them.
And we also have $2 million set aside if the city council chooses to adopt zoning for Washington Street. We've got $2 million in design money to do that whole stretch from West Newton Square all the way down to Craft Street, and it will involve making it better for people in their cars, people who are cycling, people who are walking. So that's the plan.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Bentley. I'm from 168 Mount Vernon Street in West Newton. In both the zoning work that you guys have done and the Newton Street improvements, what kind of consideration has been given to historic context, historic buildings, and preserving that historic context for Newton?
Yes, so a lot, particularly in the village centers, which I think Lily mentioned are the jewels. So we've limited the height in that location, and we've provided a specific incentive to maintain the buildings as they are right now. And it's an incentive to go up an additional floor from 3 to 4. And the way you do that is by preserving the existing building. So we have been very sensitive to that.
Paula Evans, I live at 44 Putnam Street in West Newton. I'm not feeling terribly confident about development in this city as I watch people rip down homes and put up huge McMansions, which have nothing to do with increasing density in Newton on West Newton Hill. I want to know if this sheet that I'm looking at, which many of you have, is pure folly, or if I should take it seriously, because it points to the possibility of 1,600 to 1,700 new apartments and 3,000 new parking spaces, and I wonder how that fits with your whole plan.
So I want to. Yeah. All right. I want to answer both the previous question a little bit because Barney talked about Washington Street, and I will come back to this question as well. Barney talked about Washington Street, and I want to talk about the neighborhoods in the entire city and this idea of historic preservation. So first off, obviously zoning is not historic preservation, completely separate bodies of rules, but as I noted in the presentation, our current body of zoning is creating an environment that in some respects encourages or incentivizes a degree of teardowns. Our data shows that in the neighborhoods like what we have up here, 40% of the lots are by our analysis vulnerable to teardown, which is basically today under the current zoning. And our proposed zoning, actually, I should say, using the proposals that we shared with the Zoning and Planning Committee on Monday, the changes that we're proposing as of Monday, we are significantly reducing virtually to zero that incentive to tear down houses. And all of that is because we're really looking to the existing city, the existing buildings, and their dimensions and styles to inform what should be in the zoning ordinance going forward. Now, the sheet, not ours, and I haven't seen it, so it's. Do you want to speak to it?
No. So I've seen it. I can speak to it just a little bit. So this was something that I think was put forward by some residents. So it's not a information from the city. I think that what people have done is kind of look at what's in the first draft or the second draft of the vision plan, looked at all of the potential zoning, and looked at if everything that was there was totally maxed to the complete maximum, what could be some numbers that you would see. I think it's a little bit misleading what's in that sheet because, as Barney was saying, you're not going to have everything happen, period. You're not going to have everything certainly happen all at once. So it's...
So I would never interrupt the mayor, so, okay. So as I mentioned, it is, we don't have a number in our head because we're not the developers. We're trying to predict. Okay.
Give him a chance to answer, please.
Yeah, I'd love a chance to answer, thanks. So that's what we did this on Monday night at ZAP as well, which is kind of a build-out analysis of the zoning, which is if every conceivable parcel in the residential district were developed, what would that number be? And it's a big number, but that requires people to take action to sell their property, to subdivide their property. One of the footnotes that came out of that meeting was right now, if tomorrow folks that actually could expand their properties and subdivide their properties and build it to the max would be 2,000. So we don't expect that to happen, just like we don't expect Washington Street all of a sudden to have 3,000 units and 3,000 parking places. These things take place over time and require special permits, so there's an approval process in place. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens generally project by project, which is what we've seen.
So just quickly, I want to introduce Lyle Baker, who's a former colleague, friend of mine, who is a Ward 7 counselor, who came in a little later. You have a question?
Yes, Mary Potier, 18 Ina Circle. My pet peeve is parking. So you're bringing in all this development, affordable housing, commercial development. Where is everybody going to park? 3,000 parking spaces? What? Where? And we've already got commuters taking over the city. They park all the way up Highland Street, all the way up Chestnut Street. So there's already competition for whatever little bit of parking there is. 3,000, that just blew me away. Where are you going to have 3,000 parking spaces?
Again, I think that's a number that was taken from, if everything is developed to its full extent, what would be the number of parking spaces? That is a pretty big number. So when we designed the zoning, we looked at providing the parking underground to a great, really incentivizing that it would be underground so it wouldn't be on the street. The city is working on the whole issue of parking management. I think we have a ways to go with that and some really important work to do. I think in the West Newton Square proposal that we show, we're actually adding on-street parking, which I think is good in some ways to provide an extra source of place for people to park. But that's a number that's really frightening, but I don't think is based in reality. That's a really big number.
If I could add just one more thing. All of us know right now how challenging it can be to get a parking space in West Newton Square, so that even if you wanted to go to the Paper Mouse, you might not, or to the wherever you're trying to go, or La Roma, whatever. One of the really hard decisions I think that will face the city council is the one that's a lightning rod here. Why the heck did we have any building in this plan that was 10 stories? And the fascinating thing about that is it's at the current MBTA site, which is kind of literally low typographically. Am I saying that right? And one of the ideas is to build in extra parking there that could allow businesses to actually thrive in West Newton Square, because they're being crunched right now by the lack of parking. Building that kind of parking is expensive, so that therefore when you look at the economics, if we want that parking and if we want the developer to also help pay to improve West Newton Square's commuter rail stop, all of a sudden that starts poking the building up high. And that's a real trade-off, and I think that creates a lot of soul searching for each of us and for the city councilors. Would you rather keep it at 3 or 4 stories, not have the extra parking, not get the money to improve the T? To me, that's a tough call. I can see some people who would say, forget the height and keep things as it is, and we'll make that trade-off. I think for others, they'd be willing to make the trade-off, and I think the city council will think that through. That's somebody earlier asked that really interesting question, why have any tall buildings? I think that's the reason.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we preserved that option, Mayor, so that it ultimately falls with the city council to make that decision if you want to go above 5 or 6 stories.
So Jim Eckenrode, I live at 30 Bird Avenue in West Newton, and my question actually has to do with what we just talked about, which is the process going forward, right? So we're all here to provide you with input. We provided input from draft 1 to draft 2. And in the memo that was created from the planning department accompanying the release of draft 2, it says, nearly all who commented on the heights of buildings here, and I speak specifically of the West Newton Station area, said they wanted to see shorter buildings than were shown in draft 1. We ended up with the largest option of the 3. To your point, that's exactly how I made that comparison. I looked at the 3 options from version 1, and what was shown as the preferred option in version 2, which was the decked park option, which results in 1 million square feet of commercial real estate, et cetera, et cetera. So even though everybody who commented said, we don't want that, that's what we ended up with. So how can we be confident that what we're all saying here today is actually going to be incorporated going forward?
So great question. In draft one, there were 3 options at a couple of key sites, and some illustrations showing those options and some of the trade-offs. You're right, the memo does say that most people who commented wanted to see lower buildings there. Not everybody who commented wanted to see lower buildings there. There were a few people who did say they wanted to see taller ones. I think that our task was, as the mayor was saying, to weigh some of these options, and also to say in other parts of the plan, people were really saying that they wanted some of these other benefits. And as I think the mayor just laid out, that's one of the things for us to weigh and balance. There is, as you'll see in the second draft height map, really a limiting of the areas where that height would be allowed, as well as some other zoning tools. So we heard loud and clear that people don't want to have many buildings of the same size, or many high buildings certainly next to each other. So we're looking at zoning tools that would actually require people to create different heights. Also the width of the building to be narrow. So there's a couple different things in there that sort of blend some of what we heard into the preferred option.
And can I add one more thing? The other thing that we heard a lot about, and I suspect all of us in the room believe, is we're seeing how expensive it is to live here in Newton, to buy into Newton. For me at my age, for my kids to come and be here, for some of us to be a senior and to downsize and find an elevator building. So the other tricky part about having taller buildings, and again it's a trade-off, is it comes with that zoning that requires a whole slew of the apartments to be set aside permanently for lower income or workforce, people who have workforce incomes. That also is something all of us want, and it's really hard to do without any additional buildings, because the houses that we have, there are wonderful nonprofits who try to buy them and fix them up and have them be permanently affordable. It's just so darn expensive that, you know, a house in Newton, it could be $1 million now, and you get one family living there. So that's the other tension that all of us are facing. And again, I believe it that almost everybody in this room wants to increase the affordability of Newton. And that is one way, and probably the most obvious way to do it. It comes with a trade-off. Raise your hand if you would prefer that no building over 4 stories be built. See, lots of people would prefer that. Can I also do this? Raise your hand if you want more affordable housing in Newton. Yeah, real affordable housing. Yeah, real. I believe it. So we're feeling this tension here in the room, and it's a hard decision. It really is.
So just to address Jim, so there was significant changes from draft 1 to draft 2. So that area, that station area, was much broader and had many more tall buildings that looked like downtown Boston, and that was a result of the consultants saying, here's an opportunity here to really capitalize on an area that could have the density because it's close to the train station. That was not an option we went forward with. We said that is unacceptable. It's got to be lower story buildings, more like 10. Let's shrink the area to the area right adjacent to the station. So we did that in a lot of places along Washington Street. I'd be happy to talk to folks afterwards.
So let me weigh in here now. I'm City Councilor Jim Cody, so we've heard a lot about the City Council and where we're going to come into play with this. So the part of the political process comes into play once we've done this great planning job. So, you know, it's a credit to the planning department, the mayor's staff, and everybody else that we've come to this point to give us tools to work with. So I live in West Newton. You know, we have a political process in play. There's 24 city councilors, right? So to get something approved in the city, we have to get a majority. So we could, the 3 of us, Barbara, myself, and Andrea, could sit there and say no, 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 no. But we know we want to work with this because we got a great plan here. And to have a great plan work, we have to take everybody's input and make it realistic. Now, the political process comes after all of this. So what that means is, the reality of getting a 10-story building built is one of those we'll see. That comes down to us, but it comes down to us having goodwill with our colleagues on the city council to explain to them what our rationale is and how we have the backing of the residents to negotiate and make things happen while keeping you totally informed. So we've had so we're in West Newton here, right? So we've had a lot of construction that we haven't been able to control over in Waltham. And they've built a lot of housing. So we've had no say in that, right? And that's closer to us than a lot of this other stuff. So we're going to now have a big say here, and we want to work with it to make nice-looking buildings, appropriate, roads being appropriate. So it's a work in progress. I think if you talk to, speaking for my colleagues, Barbara and Andrea, who's not here tonight, and former colleague Ted, who did a lot of work on this, we're here to make it work and to get the right mix and to get the right project so that your quality of life doesn't change, that we can enhance it with better downtown, better West Newton Square, and then we can move forward. And reality is, a lot of these buildings we're getting the tools to work with. It doesn't mean they'll happen. And then the last point I want to make is on the school system, because I'd love to be sitting in here right now and say this is a brand new building, but it's not, obviously. So we know it's overcrowded and outdated and such like that. But one thing to note, and I'm kind of stealing this from Lily from planning, is the city of Newton since the 90s has been committed to quality education and educating whatever child shows up in the city. So because of that, you can rest assured if you're a parent, and I'm a parent of many kids, you can be rest assured that the city will do everything they can, like the mayor said, to have a quality education program. And the school committee knows that, the city council knows that, and nothing would be done to jeopardize the quality of life for your child or grandchild.
So I've only got time for 2 more questions, and I just want to ask my presenters and responders to be as brief and concise as possible. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question tonight, please take down these email addresses. One is washingtonstreet@newtonma.gov. That relates to Hello Washington Street. Zoning Redesign @newtonma.gov, and West Newton Square, that's SQ, @newtonma.gov, and you will get your comments in, questions in, and they'll get responded to.
My name is Pam Wright, and I live at 30 Eden Ave, half a block from West Newton. I have a lot of different questions, but I'm just going to concentrate on West Newton Square. First comment is the core of West Newton, you say it's going to be 3 stories tall by right. And if you read the code, that is 61 feet tall, which is 1.5 times the height of CVS, twice the height of the police station. Now, you hope they wouldn't build to the full extent that's allowed, but hope does not belong in the zoning code. So in that respect, there should be a maximum height. You shouldn't be able to up it, each different thing. My question, though, is about the single lane in West Newton and being on Eden Ave where cut through and people are parking there. Are you going to do a temporary single lane through West Newton and see how it goes and hear back from the residents before you make it permanent? Because you did a change in Newton Center, and that was terrible. And then you had to rip it out.
So this was an issue. This was an issue during the design that came up. What's going to happen? What's the delay going to be under these new conditions? And it was about 60 seconds overall from one end of the square to the other. Whether or not that's going to cause people to, we certainly we're not desirous of having people cut through the neighborhoods. One of the slides we didn't show is this idea of neighborhood traffic calming to make it really difficult for people to cut through streets in Newton. This is a problem that communities all over the country are dealing with thanks to Waze and other types of apps. They'll tell you to go different ways. We're committed to making sure that it's not going to be an easy process for people to cut through the neighborhood. So, the problem is that this is a place that people like to cut through. The cars come from not just Newton, but all over the place because it's convenient. Part of the goal of this project is to make it not a cut through and that maybe change behaviors from some people so that it's more of a local network than it is a pass through. No, it's not going to be a temporary. We're going to be obviously monitoring it closely, as Lily said. The traffic signals now speak to each other, so it should work better overall.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Mandel, a lifelong resident on West Newton Hill at 75 Highland Street. I think my concern is, and sort of the backdrop, I think what's gotten a lot of people really, upset is there seems to be one particular developer that has bought property under various LLCs and different, from one end of Washington Street to the other in Newton, and there's a lot of talk about this, and so there's a big concern about, we hope this doesn't happen, we hope, but that particular developer, mayor, I mean, there's a lot of concern. So could you speak to that? Because that's a backdrop
Right.
of, this is not just hope,
Great
this is going to
question.
happen.
Yeah. We're feeling, and by the way, there is one area where we're doing a pilot, so I'm just responding. There is an area where we're doing a pilot right around Toadies. So Robert Korf Mark Development, all of us have been watching very intently, and obviously he owns the Riverside site and along Washington Street. He's picking up parcels, putting them together, and we're really, one of the reasons we want to get this to the city council, have them wrestle with it and have them vote on it, is so that the zoning is in place and it's clear what we want, rather than having Corf come in and just be going project by project, one by one by one to the city council. So we're really anxious to get this master plan in place, and sooner rather than later, preferably 2019. Pardon me? So this plan for any developer tells them what we want and makes them listen to us rather than us reacting to them. That's why we're doing this. So thank you. So
be polite,
you know what?
please.
I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. You know I always talk to you. I think we unfortunately are going to stop here. I'm hanging out as long as the custodian's here, so you can talk to me. I have open office hours almost every week. Come visit me in my office. I'm available. I do mayoral meetups. I'm right here. Let me know anytime you want to talk to me. I'm happy to do it. Your city councilors are here. They're readily available. Barbara, raise your hand and come in this. Right.
So
you're
I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I know I didn't get to all your questions. The mayor said she'd hang out for a while if you got questions for her, some of the other folks that are here. If you do have any questions, please submit them in writing. The email addresses are right here. And thank you all for coming out tonight. Please drive safely.